Good morning, everyone. I apologize for getting this video out a little bit later. I was doing some traveling yesterday. Just got in last night. This is just a look at the CAL FIRE map as of this morning on Thursday, June 20th. You can find this just by going to fire.ca for California.gov. This shows all the active wildfires across California. You can see it's getting kind of busy here in June. A lot of these are, more foothill fires. We talked earlier in the year about how some of the foothills kind of predictably dry out in June, and there's kind of this counterintuitive influence of all the rainfall that we had, even some of the late rainfall, where it promotes a lot of new growth near the ground. Unfortunately, in summer, right, we've had these heat waves, excessive heat watches, warnings that can dry that new grass out quickly, and that makes, unfortunately, pretty good tinder. So a number of fires still going, many of them increasingly contained here today. Perhaps the biggest one now is the Sites fire up in Northern California in the Sacramento Valley, up near 20,000 acres, 10% contained, although that's an improvement from just a bit ago. So a busy map here, and there's been some impressive imagery out of this. We had a trough come through this past weekend, kind of at the end of the weekend. That brought some high winds, some dry air to the area. Sometimes kind of, again, counterintuitively, the troughs, even those what we think of with colder weather, if it brings the winds in, they can come downsloping off these foothills here along the coast, and that can dry out the air, make it a little bit warmer, and end up being, just as important and impactful in terms of wildfires as compared to, a heat wave or a big upper level ridge. Wanted to zoom in closer. This is just north of Los Angeles. I believe this was the Post fire here. You can see it burning there north of the metro area. Again, kind of not what we'd call like in the forested, alpine area, but more along the foothills that are, you can just tell by looking at they're drying out near the Grapevine. We saw another impactful event this past, kind of earlier in the week in Ruidoso, a town in New Mexico, which unfortunately dealt with a large wildfire there, damaged a number of structures. We did finally get some tropical moisture into the area. That is because of Tropical Storm Alberto, which pushed in through the Bay of Campeche, down in eastern and northeastern Mexico, southeastern Texas. And that brought all these showers and thunderstorms to eastern New Mexico and launched this dust storm across southern New Mexico. You can see that there. The kind of oblique view of the satellite, that's the best way I can put it. You can see how it's at an angle, actually allows you to see that 3D structure of the dust storm. I have not seen satellite imagery this neat of a dust storm, being able to actually kind of see that 3D vertical structure of the dust storm. You can see it pushing the air out of its way as it goes along, pushing the dust up into the air. And these are the thunderstorms responsible for that. And just an incredible satellite view. I'll just play it over and over again. I could watch this stuff all day. And just yesterday in California, I'll take this to the beginning here. That was overnight. But if you look closely, there's the Sites fire here up in near the Sacramento Valley. Let me get my brush on the screen here, make it a little bit more visible. And you can see the burn scar there, a few other burn scars showing up. Again, in the foothills of California, so that's the area that was drying down. Play that one more time. If you see that little orange flicker there, that is actually the satellite here picking up the heat signature from the new fire on the edge of that burn scar. Going in a different direction from heat and fire, if we go up in Montana, again, that same trough that brought the concerns with wildfires in California, some high winds in some areas, was responsible for much cooler temperatures than average in parts of Montana and the upper Snake River Valley. This is just looking at the current low temperatures. Let me update this. Let me see if I can get this a little bit more updated where we're at now. You can see down in the mid-30s for parts of the Golden Triangle, northwest of Great Falls. So getting down toward frost territory. Don't see freezing temperatures there yet, but it's basically, right, we're on the eve of the solstice, and we're talking about near frost temperatures in the northwest. Just gives you an idea of the kind of potency of these troughs here. And then similarly, if you look in kind of the northeastern reaches of the Snake River Valley, eastern Idaho, down into the high 30s here as of Thursday morning, that's actually warmer than we were. I'm going to take this back to Wednesday morning and see we're actually all the way down to freezing in some of these municipalities, again, on the far upper Snake River Valley, but even getting into kind of frost territory a little bit further west. So an impactful trough across the much of the west region, whether it's wildfires and wind. We had some rain elsewhere. We've had cold temperatures in Montana. It was just a kind of a busy weekend and busy early week here that I wanted to catch you all up on. I did mention that Tropical Storm Alberto. It is the first storm of the season. Now, I don't typically talk too much about Atlantic hurricanes when we're talking about, West region weather or what we deal with west of the divide. But in some instances, it becomes relevant for, what we're talking about here. And I think this is a good example. This is a forecast from the ECMWF, so a model I show pretty regularly. But it's showing precipitable water, which you can think of as an absolute measure of moisture in the atmosphere, kind of top to bottom. And we use that just to see potential for rainfall, how much moisture is loaded in the air. And you can see the moisture associated with Tropical Storm Alberto. It's really this huge plume here that extends up into parts of the southwest. And as this pushes more on shore, I showed you those showers and thunderstorms, all that cloudiness behind the dust storm. Well, this is in part due to the moisture that Alberto has pushed into parts of New Mexico and now eastern Arizona. I'm going to play this through Thursday and into Friday, and you see how anomalous this moisture is for June in the Four Corners region, right? This area gets pretty dry before the monsoon naturally, but a tropical storm, that is one way to push in quite a bit of moisture coming from the Atlantic, and we're seeing that here and would expect additional showers and thunderstorms over the next few days for the Four Corners region, eastern Arizona, perhaps Tucson, much of New Mexico, parts of Colorado and Utah. It doesn't appear like it's going to get in over to Southern California or far southwest Arizona. We just jump over and look at the same forecast, the ECMWF, but their precipitation. Going out into the future, you can see the center of that tropical storm is now inland over eastern Mexico, running into the mountains there. But all that moisture is going to continue pushing toward the west and the northwest. Friday afternoon, you can see rain and showers, thunderstorms in parts of the Four Corners region, getting into eastern Arizona at times on Friday p.m. Saturday, a continuation of that kind of weakening throughout the weekend. But you can see nothing really getting into Southern California, the lower Colorado River Valley. Can't rule out, right, an errant thunderstorm or a shower bringing some rainfall to this area, but doesn't appear too likely. Perhaps just some clouds, more so than we usually get here in late June. The rainfall that we are getting across the Four Corners region, the southwest, I just mentioned, right, the wildfire in New Mexico, that is, an area that we've been focused on has been pretty dry. And some of the forecasts for later this summer, even into July or August, are, showing a heat signature in this area here. So, unfortunately, there was some flooding, coincidentally, near Ruidoso. There's burn scars there. That really exacerbated the issue. So, flooding is not something we want, but in the big kind of picture of this, getting some rainfall in here and some drought areas that are probably going to be dealing with more heat later this year, certainly, will help to ameliorate some of the dryness concerns that we've seen just persist in this area pretty often since we turned the page to this decade, really, if we go back that far. If we look at the forecast precipitation just over the next 7 days, and let's make this all the way out to Thursday. I don't usually do this, but there's really not too much in the forecast, right? We're kind of at the end of June. This is basically the minimum climatologically. So on average, June is where we get the least precip perhaps across the west, because when we get into July and August, we start to get into some tropical moisture. Maybe we have a stronger monsoon season, and some of these areas can pick up, some rainfall here in those months. But it just so happens that tropical storm Alberto is bringing in tropical kind of monsoon-like conditions to the Four Corners region. We are watching some troughs that are likely to skate through the far northwest that could bring some precipitation to some of the elevation, the mountain ranges here in Washington, perhaps even parts of Oregon. But even then, not terribly significant if you look at some of these numbers here, and then can't rule out some showers here in northwest Montana. But even then, we're talking very paltry amounts in northwest Montana, the Golden Triangle area. Elsewhere, fairly dry over the next 7 days, as is often the case as we go through summer here. When I show you the upper level height map, kind of get a handle on where the troughs and ridge patterns are, you can actually see the kind of upper level reflection of Tropical Storm Alberto down in Mexico there. We have kind of a weak low here, not doing too much here across California. Just kind of too weak and too late in the season here to get much weather out of a system like this. We're not doing a northeast video here, but you can see how anomalous that ridge here is across the American Northeast and parts of southeastern Canada. That has prompted a heat wave out east. Okay, I'm not used to doing these in the morning. Prompting a heat wave out east. But I'm going to take this forecast forward, and I'll show you what we're kind of watching as we go through the weekend here. So I take this through Thursday and then into Friday, that ridge, or I should say that trough, weakening very quickly across California. And that's going to give way to some weak ridging here across the immediate west coast and kind of the western half of the west region, if you will. That will bring temperatures up pretty quickly Thursday and then into Friday for California and some of these other areas here out west. So you go through the day Saturday and then into Sunday. See, that ridge is strengthening as this trough moves into British Columbia. Sometimes these troughs can kind of reinforce the ridges out ahead of them. We're seeing that here. And that's going to increase the temperature anomalies underneath this ridge. So kind of a broad region-wide warm-up on its way, starting maybe today as that trough weakens and then increasing in magnitude through the weekend here. Not the biggest ridge, maybe not as strong as some of the heat waves we've even seen in early June here, but definitely kind of a warmer trend, I think, through this weekend and then into next week. I take this out into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. You can see, if anything, at least this forecast here from the European model, this ridge is increasing in magnitude over this area here as we get out into Tuesday afternoon and then likely Wednesday of next week. And we'll see this trough has been coming in here on some of these forecast runs, impacting the Pacific Northwest with some, I wouldn't say, non-significant, rainfall, but nothing or too much to write home about, at least on some of these early forecast models here. Just kind of too late in the season again, June, not expecting, the bulk of the rainfall to come through during those months. As you'd imagine, with the kind of trough exiting the ridge building in, it's worth kind of going through the temperature conversation here. This is looking at the National Weather Service NDFD, a National Digital Forecast Database. And this is just showing your anomalies for the high temperatures today. So rather than the absolute high temperatures, we show the anomalies just to see where we're warmer than average, where the kind of heat will build in compared to what we typically give it in late June. You can see the Pacific Northwest dealing with some warmer temperatures here today. Friday, that increases wholesale across much of the west region as a result of that trough weakening and that ridge building in. You can see Saturday even more so, with nearly 20 degree above average temperatures in some areas in southeastern Oregon, talking 10 degrees Fahrenheit plus above average in some areas of California, getting in closer to the Bay Area here. And then as I take this out into Sunday, that ridge kind of moving a little bit more over the interior, Montana, Idaho, eastern Oregon, parts of Utah and Nevada, and that trough showing its influence here across Washington, the Willamette Valley, western Oregon, as it comes through on Sunday. And then if you remember Monday and Tuesday, that ridge really just kind of parked right over an axis about like there, and that's keeping the heat underneath that ridge here. So California, Nevada, Idaho, Utah. The National Weather Service, I think, being a little bit, I don't blame them, being a little bit safe with some of these anomalies here. This could be, well above average here, maybe more so than, say, 8 degrees or 7 degrees above average. But we are talking about a 6-day forecast. It's hard to be too specific on those temperatures, but the risk for, more established heat wave for late June is there if that ridge strengthens a little bit. Safer areas here, along the northwest and Pacific Northwest coast, where we've seen this kind of persistent cooler signal here in some of the long-range models. We're seeing that now come to fruition in some of the short-range ones here. I'll show you that in a bit as we walk through the seasonal forecast in just a moment. If we look at the National Weather Service advisories map here, valid as of Thursday morning at about 5 a.m. here Pacific time. You can see the heat advisories are out for the Central Valley of California, even some of the getting closer to the coastal valleys here as a result of that ridge taking over the trough pattern that's currently over the areas. We can see also an excessive heat warning in parts of southern Arizona, which is further away from the influence of that trough here. This is looking a little bit different of a forecast. This is the GFS ensemble. This one's a little bit more updated, and it's going to take us out a little bit further in the pattern, just to give us, at least let's get us an idea where we're going in late June, and maybe get, peer into the crystal ball a bit and see what the kind of early hints are at early July. That's kind of my goal of looking at this forecast here. We'll start here on Thursday afternoon, just kind of at the end of the day here, and you can see that weak trough looks even weaker now by Thursday afternoon. If you take that forward, you can see it being replaced by a ridge as we get through the weekend. We've already looked at that part of the forecast. That's all well and good. Quickly taking this out Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. That trough that I mentioned next week, you can see that coming on shore again in the Pacific Northwest. Likely to get some precipitation out of this. Hard to say that it'll be too significant though, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Areas underneath the influence of that ridge though will still see those warm temperatures. Central Valley of California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, parts of Arizona, New Mexico, perhaps parts of even southeastern Idaho as we go through the end of the week. And then the GFS ensemble, you can see there, trying to establish more troughing near the end of June across the region. At the very least, not a large upper level ridge here. Now, we did just deal with that trough, and we had quite a bit to talk about as a result of it. You had winds, you had wildfire, you had frost concerns. I'll say, initially this trough doesn't look as potent as the one, we just dealt with. You can just see it's not, just not as fast moving, not as quick or deep or amplified. But it's kind of curious that at least in this long range model here, it does kind of park itself over the region, which at the very least perhaps keeps some clouds around and keep some cooler temperatures around through the end of June, which I don't know if it would be the worst thing after dealing with some heat, dealing with some wildfires in a number of areas across the region. That is precipitation. I did want to show this. This is the ECMWF extended forecast. This goes well out into the future, beyond what we typically show. And this is for basically, I've done this for the entire month of July here to give us an indication of what the models are thinking. And it's two things I think of when I see the widespread warmth here. One is I don't believe it, frankly. It is hard to get the entire continental U.S. warmer than average, for the entire month. It just, what goes down in the atmosphere tends to go up. You can think of it kind of like a delayed rubber band, where if you stretch one end of it, it's going to snap back in some other way. So not to say, this forecast is totally, I'm not going to totally throw it out, but I just don't think the pattern is going to end up like this, when all is said and done. It's just hard to do this. I do think we get some of this heat here. This is believable, particularly over the Front Range, parts of the Southwest here. Not so sure about, this entire pattern extending all the way to the East Coast here. But for relevance in terms of the West region, this heat here has been a very persistent signal that we've seen in the model runs. If we jump over and look at the same kind of time period for July, but look at precipitation, you can actually see some of the beginnings of the monsoon here, and that was actually what was keeping the temperatures down in the Four Corners. If you remember, the forecast from myself and from some of these other different model runs has been calling for a weaker monsoon and some warm temperature risks, right, going into kind of the peak of summer for the Four Corners region. Forecasting the monsoon is difficult. I mentioned this, earlier in June that, I wasn't very confident in the monsoon forecast. We just saw Alberto come in and deliver its own moisture. I wouldn't necessarily call that, monsoon morphology, if you will, but, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really matter. It brought in rain, it brought in cooler weather. It's going to help bring some more moisture to the soil and to the plants there and keep temperatures down a little bit as well. So acts the same. And seeing perhaps a continuation of some, near average monsoonal activity for parts of the Four Corners region, at least starting the season here. And again, with the drought there, maybe not the worst thing in the world here. Don't see it extending, right? Maybe a bit more of a later season pattern, but don't see it extending into the desert Southwest right now, at least from this forecast here. If that becomes the case, I think just kind of naturally that heat and the dryness risk would shift north. So at least from this forecast here from the ECMWF showing, I think, more heat risk along the Front Range, along parts of the interior, maybe even getting into the Northwest and the Central Valley here versus the Four Corners region where it looked a little bit more potent. This is just one forecast run. I just mentioned at the beginning of the discussion on this run that I wasn't sure how believable, how correct it was on some of the East Coast happenings. So should I extend that same uncertainty over to its monsoon, simulation here? Perhaps. I'm just thinking through it here as we walk through it. Going even bigger picture out into July and August here, I have to turn attention to the sea surface temperatures. I've been mentioning, I think, every video, we've been watching the development of La Nina. That is cool waters here extending their way into the Central Pacific would get us into a La Nina. You can tell this is what I would call, and what the Climate Prediction Center considers, the Central Tropical Pacific. And these waters are over here, right, in the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So they need to keep moving west, and they have been struggling to do so. Actually, if anything, waters in the Central Pacific might be a little bit on the warmer side versus a kind of a La Nina or on the cooler side, right, at least on this color bar that we can see here. So La Nina taking its time. I thought it would develop a little bit more. We'll see. Look through the end of June here. Might get that additional development that we talked about last week. Some of these trade winds pick up. But it's slow going now. We're in INSO neutral conditions. So that is not an El Nino, not a La Nina. Another thing we've been watching is Gulf of Alaska sea surface temperatures. We've been watching the colder waters here off the coast of California and the Baja, extending over to Hawaii here. We've been watching the warm blob north of Hawaii, occasionally kind of, I'm going to use the term slosh over to the northeast as some of these troughs have come through. They've helped kind of bring that warmer water over along the surface toward the northwest. I've mentioned how if warmer water really establishes itself here, that could increase heat risks across the Pacific Northwest. But I think we've seen this a few times now. We've seen this kind of sloshing toward the east and this kind of sloshing back as the pattern kind of switches around again. And that heat, I think, just really wants to stay anchored here because of where we're at in the negative PDO, where we're at in a developing La Nina. That's just going to continually reinforce the cooler pattern that's showing up to the east here. So while we'll get these brief, I think, pushes toward the east, I think perhaps even by the next video or the one after that, we'll see that reverse back the other way as the pattern changes a little bit predictably here. Another thing worth mentioning, at the start of this video talking about Tropical Storm Alberto, we talked about the colder waters here, Southwest California, talking about the colder waters here. Where there is warm water is right in the main development region of the Atlantic hurricane season, where we expect these hurricanes to develop. And, the skinny on hurricanes is they love this kind of warm tropical bathwater like sea surface temperatures. There's a few other things they need to develop and maintain themselves and to grow into these large, the strongest storms on Earth. But at least setting up their favorite ingredient here, I think, does not bode well, for folks over here on the Gulf Coast, the eastern part of the United States or the Caribbean, etc. So we're watching for a potentially active hurricane season. And we just saw from Alberto, the very first storm of the season, that these can at times bring anomalous moisture over into the parts of the desert Southwest into the region that, we concern ourselves with. So we perhaps have to keep an eye on that. And perhaps more anomalous Atlantic moisture coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, which if we do get a monsoon season going, you can occasionally pull some moisture up from the southeast versus the southwest and the Pacific. I'll leave it there here today for Thursday evening or Thursday morning. Again, apologies for getting the video out a little bit later. Got in late last night, wasn't able to post it at a reasonable time last night when I thought people would be able to see it. So getting out here this morning with an updated forecast. Thank you for watching.